medieval soldiers suffered brutal injuries in battle. Their chance of survival lay with barber surgeons. From cutting hair to removing limbs on the battlefield, the job of a barber surgeon was varied, and so were their tools.
600 years ago, surgery was very different from today, and this is some of the kit that the surgeons of then would be using. For example, amputations. This bit of kit was used to cut through the skin. Then you need to get through bone, and this is what they used. Believe it or not, this was used for neurosurgery. But what they didn't have at the time was anesthesia.
Despite carrying out major surgery, barber surgeons had no formal training.
What they learned on the job, and the place where they practiced the most was the battlefield.
This was also a time when new surgical techniques were developed, particularly when it came to saving the life of a future king. In 1403, 16-year-old Prince Henry was injured in the Battle of Shrewsbury while fighting rebels trying to overthrow his father, King Henry IV.
The arrow penetrated his right cheek and became lodged at the base of his skull. He was very lucky it didn't kill him instantly.
Prince Henry pulled the arrow from his face. The shaft came out, but the arrowhead remained lodged inside.
They needed to get that out before infection set in and killed him.
To the rescue, celebrated surgeon John Bradmore. Bradmore recorded what he did to save the prince's life, including a picture of the tool he made to extract the arrowhead.
And it works by ensuring that the tip is closed and then inserting it along the track caused by the arrowhead until it meets the arrowhead.
Then the screw is turned to expand the tip, locking it in place inside the arrowhead.
And then ever so slowly and gently, you extract, making sure that you don't lose it along the way. I'm amazed by the skill that would have been needed to do this successfully. Can you imagine how good that felt when that came out?
The young prince survived to become King Henry V, hero of Agincourt. But perhaps the real heroes of medieval medicine were the barber surgeons, who saved countless lives on the battlefield. Jeanne d'Arc had liberated Orléans and put the English army to flight. However, as the English retreated, they became an obstacle for Charles the Dauphin. He needed a clear path from Chinon to Reims, where he would be crowned king. Nearing the town of Patay, the English sought to regroup. But Jeanne d'Arc and her French army were closing in. The Battle of Patay was a disaster for the English. The French wiped out their bowmen and drove their forces from the Loire Valley. Now for Jeanne d'Arc and the Dauphin, the way to Reims was clear. The Maid of Orléans rode with the Dauphin through the streets and was at his side when he was finally crowned King Charles VII of France. But less than 2 years later, Jeanne was captured in battle, sold to the English, and put on trial for heresy. She spent 6 months locked in a dungeon, awaiting her fate. King Charles, who owed his crown to Jeanne, did nothing to help win her freedom. She was found guilty. On May 30th, 1431, Jeanne d'Arc was brought here, to the old market square in Rouen, where she was burned at the stake. She was 19 years old. But what the Maid of Orleans started could not be denied. Her victories were the first in a chain of successes for France's military. Liberty was within reach. Thanks to the leadership of two brothers, Jean and Gaspard Bureau, the French army became experts in the use of artillery, transforming it into a disciplined, modern fighting force. In 1448, King Charles was ready to make a major move against the English. He vowed to retake Normandy. During the 14th century, the face of war in Europe changed forever. Thanks to a substance invented by the Chinese while searching for the elixir of life: gunpowder. One of the first guns used on the battlefields of Europe was this, the bombard.
This is a large stone-throwing gun for moving big projectiles like this up and over and through castle walls.
Before the invention of the cannon, castle wall-busting projectiles had been thrown by trebuchets.
This is what took over from the trebuchet. Far easier to move from castle to castle.
Its design was simplicity itself, drawing on the skills of the barrel maker.
This has metal staves lengthways and then lots of hoops holding those staves under compression. So this is why we now call this the gun barrel as well.
The bombard was no more powerful than a trebuchet, but it did have a psychological impact on the enemy.
If we take it back several hundred years and the loudest thing is a cockerel crowing or a brawl in the pub on a Saturday night, these things are horrendously frightening.
As metallurgy improved, barrels could be made longer, increasing accuracy and power. They progressed from taking down walls to taking out soldiers, replacing the bow and arrow.
A typical arrow would get stuck in this sort of material, where ball just goes straight through. So compared to a bow and arrow, this is far more deadly.
During the 100 Years' War, there was even a precursor to the machine gun, the Ribauldequin.
She's got several barrels on her. This is the sort of gun that would have been very much against people being able to spread your shot out and hit large numbers of people in one go.
Gunpowder revolutionized warfare throughout the 100 Years' War, changing the way battles were fought forever. Before the invention of printing in the 15th century, books were painstakingly copied by hand. The finest were illuminated with brilliant colors and real gold. Illuminated text wasn't just for show. Gilded illustrations decorated important passages to highlight their significance.
Gold was used in many medieval manuscripts from early days because it was very expensive and it indicated that the manuscript itself was valuable. The light would reflect from candles or from the sunlight, and so it looked as though the book itself was illuminated. In medieval manuscripts, it looks as though this is solid gold. In fact, it's not. The gold itself is tissue thin.
The solid appearance is achieved by laying the gold on a cushion of plaster mixed with glue, called gesso.
By raising the gold from the surface of the skin, that means that it catches the light even more.
The glue in the gesso is softened by breathing on it.
We then have 3 seconds to get the gold on, and I'm using a burnisher, which is a polished stone, just to make sure that the gold sticks. Then the burnisher is used to polish the gold up. See, it's coming up now. So it's coming nice and shiny.
Next, the miniature is painted.
The base colour will be done first, then the tints and the shades will be added, and finally, the white highlights and the outline, which lifts it and brings the whole thing to life.
The medieval paint box contained pigments from across the world, such as ultramarine from Afghanistan and orpiment gathered from volcanic craters.
It often took a long time to complete these medieval miniatures. This one between a month and 6 weeks, from start to finish.
An entire book could take a team of illuminators several years to complete. Many medieval manuscripts still survive today, fully preserved, with their colors just as vivid as the day they were illustrated. Thanks to the explosive force of cannon fire, the French were close to victory in this century-long war. But in a final grasp at power, the English dispatched a fresh army, equipped with their tried and tested longbows. Formigny would be a trial of old versus new, to determine the fate of France. At Formigny, the roar of cannon fire sounded the death knell for England's ambitions in France. King Charles and the Bureau brothers did not let up on the offensive, and in 1453, the English retreated across the Channel. France was finally at peace. More than 100 years had passed since the first English chevauchés had scorched the land. The iconic French knights who fought in those early days would not have recognized their own military a century later. The English longbow, once the scourge of France, was no match for French artillery in the last years of the war. And by 1453, France's border looked very different, growing to encompass territories once claimed by England and their allies. After enduring a century of conflict, France emerged as a transformed nation. The country and its people had persevered and unified into a kingdom that could defend itself. Against all odds, France had won the 100 Years' War.